Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is my Forbes colleague, money and politics reporter, Kyle Khan-Mullins. Kyle, thanks so much for joining me.
Always great to be here, Brittany. Thanks for having me.
You report on finances and wealth of people in politics, and now you obviously have a focus on those in Trump's orbit and those serving in Trump's administration. If you follow conservative media at all, you do know who Dan Bongino is. He was just tapped by the president to serve as his deputy director of the FBI. So there are multiple sides of Dan Bongino, as you report, the law enforcement side, the political side, as well as the media side. So to start off the conversation, can you talk about his beginnings in law enforcement?
Absolutely. Let's go all the way back to the halcyon days of the 1990s. Dan Bongino got his start in law enforcement at the New York Police Department. He was a cadet while he was finishing up his college degrees, and then he served a couple of years as an officer. After that, he switched over to the Secret Service. Secret Service, a lot of people don't know, they actually work on, they don't just protect the president, they also work on currency-related crimes like counterfeiting, that kind of thing. So he worked on that side of the Secret Service for a little while. Then he was on both George W. Bush's and Barack Obama's presidential protection details. And he was doing that until 2011 when he retired to run for Senate.
So then, as you said, he did dip his toe in politics there, had a few unsuccessful bids, but talk to us about those.
Yeah, he ran for Senate initially in Maryland, and this is 2011-2012 election cycle. Maryland, a deep blue state. He ran as a Republican. He lost by 30 points. There's just no sugarcoating that. It was also a presidential election year that Barack Obama was winning, so the Democrats were doing well that year. It seemed like a long shot from the start. But that didn't deter him. He next ran for a Maryland House seat, House of Representatives seat. And he had a very narrow loss there, only lost by 1.5 points in 2014 to a Democratic incumbent. And then in 2016, after he moved to Florida, he ran for a Florida House of Representatives seat, but he didn't make it out of the Republican primary. So he had 3 unsuccessful bids for federal office in 3 straight election cycles.
But according to your reporting, what really blew up Dan Bongino's fortune was his career in media. So after this transition from law enforcement, the Secret Service, to then those few political bids, he became the host of his own show. So talk to us about his start there.
Yeah, really since 2016, he's been a fixture on conservative media. And it actually started a little bit before that. He wrote 2 books about his time in the Secret Service and his time in the White House, kind of positioning himself as somebody who was close to the inside of government and so understands why it needs to be changed and reformed in a conservative direction. But he, like I said, he's really been a fixture. In addition to his own show, the Dan Bongino Show, which is a podcast and radio, he has also at times hosted shows on NRA TV, on Fox. So he's really been all over the place, and he is one of the biggest names in conservative media these days.
And what type of content is he pushing out? Because it seems like it's both podcast, audio, video. Talk to us about that.
I listened to some of his stuff for reporting out this article. He is very conservative, very Trump loyal, I would say. And the easiest way to look at that is after the 2020 election, after Trump lost the 2020 election, Dan Bongino was one of the biggest supporters of overturning the election results and of promoting conspiracy theories about fraud in that election. He really hews to the Trumpian conservative line pretty much across the board. He's pretty conspiratorial, I would say, in his thinking. He's also showed up on places like InfoWars at times. And another example of that, when Israel and Hamas were trying to do a ceasefire deal late last year, he posited that the Biden administration was actually negotiating on behalf of Hamas, not on behalf of their purported ally Israel, and that Trump was the one who came in and actually got the ceasefire deal done. There's some evidence to that. Obviously, the Trump team was working on that deal, but there's a lot to unpack in basically all of his episodes. Has defended the January 6th insurrectionists, since that all happened. So very Trump loyal, very conservative line, and we could see it's turned out well for him because now he's going to be serving in the Trump administration.
As you pointed out, he really is a fixture in conservative media, so you would think his partnership with Rumble would really be a match made in right-wing heaven. So talk to us about Rumble. What is that platform and how well does it perform?
Yeah, his show is on Rumble now. Rumble, not YouTube. Rumble's this YouTube alternative. They're marketing themselves as a free speech promoting alternative. They really took off in 2020. That is when conservatives were getting increasingly frustrated with content moderation on YouTube. And so a lot of them started switching over to this other platform, and their viewership really exploded. Dan Bongino, one of the first movers over to Rumble at that point. He moved over in late 2020, shortly after a Republican Congressman, Devin Nunes, now heading up Truth Social, by the way, moved over in the first place. But yeah, he and Rumble, definitely a match made in heaven. Rumble actually invested in a payment processing company that Dan Bongino was a co-founder of early on. And then it seems like Bongino invested back in Rumble at some point. He got in on the ground floor, because by the time Rumble went public via a SPAC deal in 2022, we can see in SEC filings that he owned almost 16 million shares. He now owns over 16 million shares of the company. So he's very heavily invested in Rumble.
So his relationship with Rumble, per your reporting, seems to be a financially beneficial two-way street. And he does have a lot of shares in the company. So how much are they worth?
At Monday's close, they were worth almost $160 million. So that's almost certainly the majority of his wealth. Definitely his podcast and radio show, his media stuff, all of that has done well. So I'm not discounting any of that. But that is a very, very significant chunk of change. And again, it seems like he got in on the ground floor there, as far as we can tell. So probably working from a low cost basis there. Those shares are certainly worth a lot.
Since Dan Bongino announced that he was tapped by Trump to serve as the deputy director of the FBI, how have the Rumble stock prices reacted?
On Monday, which is when the announcement went out Sunday night, and Bongino talked about it on his show on Monday, and the stock was down about 7% on Monday. It's down 15% since last week. So they're clearly not reacting well. And I think there's a pretty obvious reason for that. Bongino is one of Rumble's biggest creators, one of their most important figureheads. And so for him to be leaving and shutting down his show, he can't run his show while he's the deputy director of the FBI. That's gonna, that could be a potential real hit to the company. Now, the company did put out a statement. They said that the revenue associated with his show is not material to the company. So this could be a bit of a market overreaction, right? But that was what the company said in response.
And in your reporting, you have the exact number of just how many people, overall viewers on Rumble, were watching him on election night. And it was a large chunk of their overall viewers. But on his podcast, he discussed being tapped by the president for the deputy FBI director role. He mulled it over. What did he exactly say this week on the podcast?
Yeah, this was a bit of an emotional. You could tell he was clearly quite emotional in this episode. He even said at one point that he's going to have his man card revoked because he was becoming emotional in public. But he said he wasn't worried about money. We know why. And he also said he was more worried about his audience, that he understood there was a chance they were going to, leave and go to other creators. And so when he was done in government, he might come back and not have that audience that he'd worked for years and years to build up. And we're talking about an audience, his videos, his live streams routinely draw hundreds of thousands of viewers and millions after they're finished posting. He has over 3.5 million followers on Rumble now. But he says this is a mission I can't say no to. That was what really stuck out to me from that episode.
Well, Kyle, per usual, I appreciate your reporting. Thank you so much for joining me.
Always great to be here, Brittany. Thanks again.